Hey everyone, it's Amit. So on August 3rd, 2021, the CDC extended the eviction moratorium all the way through to October 3rd, 2021. Needless to say, it was under a significant amount of political pressure by both the administration as well as members of Congress, and this was done even after the Supreme Court basically ruled this whole thing as effectively being unconstitutional. Anyway, I'm not going to go any further into it in terms of some of this background as it relates to the eviction moratorium. I've already done videos on that, and I'll include links to that in the description below. As it relates to this extension of the eviction moratorium, there's been a host of legal or landlord association lawsuits against the states as well as against the administration. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. What I want to talk about is what is the status of a lot of these lawsuits that have effectively been raised. What does it all mean? And what does it really mean for housing as a whole as an investment class on a go-forward basis? But before I get too far into it, don't forget to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, and let's get into it. So there's been lots and lots of challenges as it relates to the eviction moratorium when it comes to the landlords. Okay, so landlords are having to deal with back rent. In several instances, there's been like tens of thousands of dollars in back rent. In addition to that, there's been a lot of challenges with respect to federal allocation of some of these funds that they've basically set aside, about $47 billion that have basically been given to the states, and states are of course having all of these challenges in terms of basically dispersing a lot of these funds to the landlords eventually. And the landlords are also kind of messed up because the landlords have to rely upon the tenants' cooperation in order to get some of these state filings, such that they can basically even get access to some of these federal funds. So what have landlords done around this? Well, they've done what you would expect, okay? So a lot of them have deferred the repairs and maintenance on a lot of their property. Other small landlords are basically selling their homes to bigger landlords who can effectively weather the storm that is this whole eviction moratorium. Some landlords have basically increased the scale with which they will be reviewing tenant applications on a go-forward basis, which is probably going to be a societal challenge as a whole. Landlords are also increasing the rent because they want to be compensated when it comes to these types of fact pattern arising in the future. So to date, lawsuits have been filed in almost all states by landlords as well as landlord association groups. I say almost because certain states, such as the state of Tennessee, have effectively decided that this whole eviction moratorium is basically unconstitutional and they do not need to comply with it. Now, what is happening in the state of Tennessee is there's been a significant increase in the number of applications for evictions since the July 31st, 2021 eviction moratorium expired. The state of Tennessee has basically come out and said that, hey, if you're a tenant and you have certain issues with respect to paying off your rent due to a variety of different reasons, you need to go ahead and apply for rent relief immediately, or you need to come into the court system and basically tell the courts and the landlords what it is or what is causing you to prevent yourself from basically paying that rent, okay? And the state of Tennessee also has other rules which basically does not expunge an eviction from a renter's record. In certain other states, landlord lawsuits have been sort of like partially successful, I would say. New York has generally been a great safe haven when it comes to a lot of these tenants. However, on August 12th, the Supreme Court struck down the provision in the state law of New York that allowed tenants to use financial hardship declaration forms, sworn statements that they were financially impacted by the health crisis, as an automatic defense against eviction, okay? So this is where it comes to the partially successful aspect of this whole thing, because this whole self-declaration thing of income issues is no longer suitable or effective in the state of New York. The court struck this down because it violated the long-standing precedent that no man can be a judge in his own case. So this is sort of like precedent where it effectively is aligning with the Tennessee law. So it certainly appears that some of these lawsuits and some of these state mandates are moving slowly but surely towards the benefit of the landlords. But if you were to think that, that is not necessarily the case. So on Friday, August 13th, a federal judge in Washington, D.C., Dabney Frederick, denied a request from various landlord associations that she blocked the moratorium, but did acknowledge that the moratorium faces an uncertain legal future, and she did this based on some prior guidance that was basically released by the U.S. Court of Appeals. So then what has happened is the landlord associations and the landlords themselves have filed a complaint to the U.S. Court of Appeals, and as of just this past last Friday. So as of August 20th, this Court of Appeals basically also ruled in favor of the eviction moratorium. So where are we now with this whole thing? Well, the landlords are done with the U.S. Court of Appeals. The U.S. Court of Appeals has basically said that this whole thing is not going to work anyway, and now they've taken it up to the Supreme Court. So now, as of just yesterday, these landlord groups have effectively filed a complaint with the U.S. Supreme Court because that is the final body. And to be very frank with you, this was sort of expected, okay? Because previously, the U.S. Court of Appeals has basically not done anything either when this landlord complaints went up to them, and all of that has basically set precedent for some of the lower level courts, and that is why the lower level courts have not been lifting this whole eviction moratorium. Hopefully, the U.S. Supreme Court rules in the favor of lifting the whole eviction moratorium, which would of course be good for landlords and can get that whole eviction process well underway. But this whole thing is going to be very adverse when it comes to the housing market as a whole, and when it comes to treating housing as an investable investment class on a go-forward basis. And here's the reason why, okay? So the one thing that this whole eviction moratorium has basically taught people is that they do not have property rights. They do not have rights to what can and cannot be done with their respective properties, okay? With the whole CDC eviction moratorium, it's basically put the problem on the landlord. The landlord needs to provide their properties to tenants for free. Now, the challenging part, of course, is in this whole thing is when it comes to housing as an investable class, there's really two things associated with it, right? One is cash flow being rental income for all intents and purposes, and the second part being property appreciation. If the landlords cannot get cash flow out of these states, it's going to become less of a compelling opportunity to just purely rely on property appreciation, when we know property appreciation in itself is at sky-high levels and is likely going to be deteriorating over the next several months here, which I've also talked about in prior videos, and I'll include a link to up above as well as in the description below. So the bottom line is we're going to have to see where the Supreme Court basically rules in the next week or so here on which path they effectively want to take in terms of the constitutionality of the eviction moratorium, or if they say, hey, this thing is in fact unconstitutional, there should not be an extension of it, but they effectively let it run out all the way through October 3rd, 2021. But we'll see how that whole thing goes. But at its core, even this whole notion of housing becoming an investable class, with lots and lots of landlords basically selling off their properties at this point in time and not willing to deal with any of this nonsense as it relates to the eviction moratorium, is definitely a fact pattern that is rapidly happening in the United States. Anyway, what are your thoughts as it relates to this whole matter? Do you think housing will continue to be as compelling of an investment class on a go-forward basis? Include all of that in the comments below. I hope you found some value to this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.